I never thought I'd see her again. Not like this. Not here. And yet, as I walked into the boutique, my heart skipped a beat, not because of nostalgia, not because I missed her, but because I felt that familiar, cold surge of satisfaction. There she was, my sister, the one who ruined my life in ways no one else understood. She was trying on a dress that looked expensive, perfect for a gala, and I couldn't help but smile at the irony. 10 years ago, she sold my wedding dress. My dream wedding dress. A dress I had saved for months. A dress that symbolized my one chance to feel like a princess, to have that perfect day I'd fantasized about since I was a little girl. And she sold it. Not lost it, not borrowed. It sold it behind my back, under the guise of helping me be more humble. My parents laughed. Everyone laughed. Except me. I cried in the dressing room, while my family congratulated her for being a responsible elder sibling. I never forgave her. And I never forgot. But I didn't retaliate immediately. That would have been the amateur's approach. I kept my pain quiet, buried it under layers of composure, and walked away from the chaos. Because while they were laughing, I was plotting, quietly, invisibly. Every move I made, every career choice, every investment, it was all part of a long game they could never see coming. Now, 10 years later, I stood in the boutique, pretending to browse the new spring collection, while my sister twirled in front of the mirror, oblivious to the storm about to hit her life. It was a strange mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to yell at her, to shake her, to make her remember the humiliation she had caused me. But another part, a far more satisfying part, knew that patience would be sweeter. There was nothing more delicious than letting someone's arrogance blind them while you quietly became untouchable. I remember the day like it was yesterday. I had walked into that bridal shop, excitement bubbling in my chest. I was finally going to find the dress that would make me feel beautiful. She had been right beside me, offering advice, smiling that sisterly smile I had trusted. And then, just as I left for a short call, she vanished. And with her, the dress. The wedding still happened, of course, but not as I imagined. My parents scolded me for being too sensitive while she subtly made herself the star. My friends whispered, some offering sympathy, others barely concealing amusement at my misfortune. And in the background, my sister stood there, smug, as if she had delivered some sort of moral lesson. I could see it now in her reflection, the same smugness, the same overconfidence, the same unearned pride. She still thought the world revolved around her. And in some ways, it did for the moment. But that was about to change. I walked past her slowly, letting my gaze linger just long enough for her to sense me, just long enough for that flicker of unease to cross her face. But she turned back to the mirror, dismissing the feeling, convinced she was untouchable. And that was my opening. I had spent years building my life, my career, my financial independence, my network of people who didn't know the betrayal of my youth but could be leveraged in ways she would never anticipate. I wasn't just going to take revenge. I was going to craft it into an art form. Every subtle downfall, every misstep she made, every opportunity I manipulated, she would never know who orchestrated it. Until the day it all came crashing down. Today, that day had begun. I still remember that morning, the sun shining like it had no idea what was about to happen, the air crisp with promise, and my excitement almost unbearable. I had dreamed of this day for as long as I could remember. I had planned every detail, imagined every moment, and, foolishly, I had trusted her, my sister, my confidant, the person who I thought would always have my back. She smiled at me that morning as I stepped into the bedroom in my robe, sipping my coffee. "Don't worry," she said, twirling her hair with that smug little grin she always wore when she thought she was clever. "Everything's going to be perfect. You're going to look incredible." And I believed her until I walked into the bridal shop to pick up the dress. It was gone. Not misplaced, not hidden for alterations, gone. Sold. My dream, my day, my gown, it had been quietly exchanged for cash while I was distracted. Wrapped in her twisted sense of morality and superiority, I panicked. I called the shop owner, then my sister, then my mother. Each call felt heavier than the last, each excuse and laugh more unbearable. And my sister, she didn't even flinch. She acted as if I had imagined the whole thing. "You're too sensitive," she told me. "It was just a dress. Learn some humility. Not everything is about you." Humility. She called it humility. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw things. I wanted the world to understand the injustice that had been done to me. But instead I cried. I cried in the dressing room of a shop I could barely afford, holding back the tears so my makeup wouldn't ruin the one thing that was supposed to make me feel beautiful. The wedding itself was a disaster, not in the way people might expect, but in every subtle way that mattered to me. I wore a replacement gown, cheap, ill-fitting, nothing like the dream I had imagined. My parents, instead of comforting me, whispered about how I was being dramatic. My friends, some tried to be supportive, others barely disguised their amusement. And my sister, she stood at my side, smiling, that same smug, self-satisfied smile, as if she had handed me a life lesson wrapped in pain. I didn't speak up. I didn't cry out. I endured it, because I knew even then that I was stronger than I let on, that this humiliation was temporary but my life could become permanent if I played my cards right. In the years that followed, I felt the shadow of that betrayal in everything I did. Every family gathering, every casual remark, every subtle comparison was a reminder that she thought she had won, that she was untouchable, that I was nothing more than the sister she had humbled for her amusement. But while they laughed, I learned. I observed. I made notes. I planned. Every small victory I achieved in my career, every connection I made, every opportunity I seized, it was all in service of a long game that would eventually make me untouchable. And the best part? She had no idea. Not even a hint. She believed the world owed her, believed her charm and status could shield her from anything. She was arrogant, naive, and blind to the storm I was quietly preparing. Even then, I started to imagine the day I would walk into her life, fully realized and unstoppable, and watch her crumble, not violently, not with malice, but in the perfect way that only karma, patience, and strategy could deliver. That day would come, and when it did, it would be absolute. After that wedding day, I made a decision. I decided that my life would no longer be defined by the people who had humiliated me, who had laughed while I cried, or by the sister who had stolen what was rightfully mine. I wouldn't chase revenge in the moment, not yet. I would do something far better. I would rise. Quietly, relentlessly, unstoppably. I left the small town where everyone knew my humiliation story. I moved to the city where no one recognized me, where I could reinvent myself without the shadow of my family looming over me. I found a modest apartment and started working long hours, building my career brick by brick. Every promotion I earned, every deal I closed, every project I led, it was proof that I didn't need their approval. I didn't need her. It wasn't easy. Some nights, I'd lie awake thinking about that wedding dress, about the humiliation, about how they all thought they had won. Some nights, I'd let myself imagine the perfect moment of revenge. But I also learned to channel that pain into purpose. I became meticulous, strategic, and patient. I learned the power of observation, of understanding people, their weaknesses, their desires, their arrogance. That knowledge would be crucial one day. During those years, I quietly built my independence. I invested wisely, networked strategically, and surrounded myself with people who valued my intelligence, not my family name. I didn't just want success, I wanted influence. I wanted the kind of power that wasn't flashy but undeniable. I wanted the ability to change lives with a single decision, and that included hers. Meanwhile, my family carried on as if nothing had happened. They assumed I was struggling, assumed I was still the sensitive, gullible girl they had laughed at 10 years ago. And my sister. Oh, my sister thrived in her arrogance. She married young, flaunted her life on social media, and paraded her success like a badge of honor. She had no idea that while she was celebrating her perceived victories, I was quietly building the arsenal that would one day dismantle her life with precision. I'll admit sometimes it was painful to watch. Every Instagram post, every bragging story, every careless comment about her perfect life was a reminder of what she had stolen from me. But I turned that pain into fuel. I studied her patterns, her habits, her friendships. I noticed the cracks in her relationships, the small poor choices she made thinking no one noticed. And I filed them away. Every mistake, every arrogance, every moment of overconfidence would be used later. By the time I returned to her orbit, I was unrecognizable not just in appearance but in presence. I carried myself with quiet authority, and I had built a life she could only dream of. My career had skyrocketed. My finances were secure. I had influence in circles she had never penetrated. And yet, I kept it all hidden, as though I were a shadow slipping past her blind spots. I had learned the most important lesson. Revenge is not immediate. It is calculated. It is patient. And it is far more satisfying when it is invisible until the final, perfect moment. And that day was approaching faster than she could imagine. By the time I re-entered their lives, my sister was fully settled in her world of arrogance and illusion. She believed she was untouchable, that her charm and social status could protect her from anything or anyone. But I had learned long ago that arrogance is the easiest thing to exploit. And that's exactly what I planned to do. I didn't make my presence obvious at first. I didn't call or text or show up uninvited. I let her think I had faded into obscurity, that life had moved on without me. Meanwhile, I observed. I watched her patterns online, listened to mutual acquaintances, and took note of the tiniest vulnerabilities. Every careless remark she made, every brag about her investments, every moment she let her guard down, it was ammunition. It started small. A tip here, a suggestion there, a seemingly innocent piece of advice that I knew she would act on without question. She never suspected the source. She was too confident. And confidence, as I learned, can be a weakness when it blinds you to reality. I remember one particular evening vividly. She was at a charity gala, talking about a business deal she had invested in, a sure thing she bragged about to anyone who would listen. She had no idea that the deal was precarious, structured in a way that someone with my insight could quietly manipulate. I reached out to a few connections in the background, ensuring her investment would teeter on the edge, enough to make her nervous but not enough to alert her fully. It was thrilling in a quiet, controlled way. I wasn't destroying her yet. I was testing the waters, making sure she would fail due to her own hubris. And as expected, she started to feel the pressure, wondering why things weren't going as planned. She was smart enough to notice something was wrong, but blind to the truth that I was behind it all. At the same time, I made sure our family remained none the wiser. My parents still saw me as the quiet, unassuming one, the sensitive sister who had moved on. They couldn't imagine that I had transformed into someone capable of outmaneuvering their favorite child, their perfect daughter. This was critical. I needed the element of surprise to be absolute. There were moments when I felt almost giddy. The power of subtle influence, the thrill of seeing someone's world wobble without them realizing why, it's intoxicating. But I tempered it with patience. Every move had to be deliberate, every reaction measured. The best revenge isn't chaos, it's precision. And while I moved behind the scenes, she continued to flaunt her life. Every social media post, every boastful story, every careless celebration of her success, I absorbed it all. I studied her circle of friends, noting who could be influenced, who could be persuaded to act subtly in ways that would advance my plan. My sister had surrounded herself with enablers and sycophants, blind to the fact that they could be redirected like pawns on a chessboard. That's when I realized the beauty of my approach. I didn't need to confront her directly. I didn't need to threaten or yell or cry. I would let her arrogance work against her. Every failure she experienced, every embarrassment she faced, would appear to the world as coincidence. And yet, behind the curtain, it would all be orchestrated. The first pieces were falling into place. And while she sipped her champagne at that gala, basking in what she thought was the security of her untouchable life, I smiled quietly to myself. Her world was about to shift. Slowly, perfectly. And she would never see me coming by now. The tension was palpable, though only on my side. My sister had started to notice that things weren't as flawless as she believed. Little things, nothing she could quite pinpoint, were slipping through the cracks. Deals that should have succeeded stumbled. Friends she trusted began questioning her decisions. Opportunities she had taken for granted began to vanish. And for the first time in years, the queen of her little world felt uncertain. She didn't know why. She didn't know who was behind it. But she felt it, and that unease was delicious. I remember the first time she confronted me directly, though she had no clue she was doing it. We were at a family gathering, one of those forced Sunday dinners where appearances mattered more than reality. She leaned toward me, whispering with a strained smile, "Have you noticed? Things aren't going the way they used to." I smiled softly, tilting my head innocently. "Things? I don't know. Everything looks fine to me," I said, my tone casual, almost maternal. Inside, though, I was savoring it. Her discomfort was growing, even as she tried to mask it. That tiny spark of doubt, the first real crack in her armor, was more satisfying than any confrontation could have been. She started asking around, subtly interrogating friends and colleagues, trying to understand why her life was unraveling in such small, precise ways. But everyone she questioned shrugged, confused, or gave her vague answers. None of them suspected that I was quietly orchestrating it all from the shadows. And she did suspect someone, though she wouldn't say it aloud. Her paranoia was growing, and that paranoia was another tool I could use. I started planting hints, enough to make her second-guess her allies. A whisper here, a misdelivered email there, carefully nudged toward her insecurities without ever revealing my hand. She was beginning to unravel, but she still didn't know why. And that was the point. It was during this time that I realized revenge wasn't just about correcting a past wrong, it was about teaching lessons she could never forget. Every subtle failure, every embarrassment, every moment where her confidence wavered, it was all part of the tapestry I was weaving. And the closer she got to realizing someone was behind it, the stronger my satisfaction grew. But even I had to admit, the thrill came with a challenge. Because for the first time, she began testing boundaries, trying to confront the unseen force she believed was sabotaging her. She reached out to influential contacts, hired advisors, and even considered legal action. She was smart more than I had given her credit for, and that made the game more exciting. I had to adjust. Every move she made was a counter. Every attempt to regain control was a test. And I thrived on it. Patience had paid off, but now strategy became critical. One wrong step on my part could tip her off, and I had invested too many years to allow that. And yet, even as the suspense built, I remained calm, poised, untouchable. That was the beauty of invisibility. In revenge, she could rage, stress, panic, and plot, all while I watched from the shadows, guiding the outcome with precision. The best part, she didn't even realize that the person she had underestimated for a decade, the one she thought would always be weak, gullible, and inferior, was now the one controlling everything. Her world was cracking, and she had no idea who held the hammer. By now, I was no longer just observing, I was actively shaping her world. Every professional move she made, every social misstep, every tiny decision could be influenced if I positioned myself correctly. And I had spent the past 10 years building the kind of network that could make that possible. I had risen to a place of power that my sister could only dream of. My career wasn't flashy, but it was influential. People listened when I spoke, decisions shifted when I acted, and opportunities opened at my fingertips. And the best part? She had no clue. She still thought she was untouchable, still believed the world owed her success, still thought I had faded into irrelevance. I began using my influence subtly, almost invisibly. A trusted colleague of mine mentioned a lucrative deal to her, along with a casual warning, nothing too alarming, just enough to sow doubt. I made sure the connections she relied on for advice were nudged toward skepticism. Every project she touched stumbled, just enough to make her nervous, but not enough to raise suspicion externally. It was almost surgical. I wasn't destroying her outright, I was shaping her failures in ways that seemed organic, almost coincidental. And every time she stumbled, I felt the quiet satisfaction of precision. Socially, I orchestrated similar subtle shifts. Friends she relied on started questioning her judgment. Allies became distant, and invitations she expected were quietly redirected. I watched her frustration build, concealed beneath forced smiles and polite conversation. The tension was exquisite, the suspense addictive. There was a moment that still makes me smile, quietly to myself. She had been boasting about a new business venture during a family dinner, as usual. I casually mentioned an insider tip to a mutual acquaintance, something seemingly minor and unrelated. Within weeks, the venture began faltering. She was frantic, trying to figure out what went wrong, looking for someone to blame. And not once did she think it could be me. And that, my dear viewers, is the beauty of invisible influence. I didn't have to confront her, didn't have to yell, didn't have to make threats. The world was subtly tipping under her feet, and she had no idea why. Even my parents remained oblivious. They still saw me as the quiet, sensitive sister who had been overshadowed by her younger sibling. That made it even sweeter. While they were busy praising her perfection, I was silently dismantling it. By now, the game had taken on a rhythm. My sister's arrogance met my patience. Her confidence began to crack. The empire she thought she had built so securely was showing the first signs of instability. And I, calm, composed, and invisible, was guiding the pieces into place. The best revenge, I realized, isn't about dramatic confrontations. It's about careful, calculated orchestration. It's about letting someone destroy themselves slowly, believing it has nothing to do with you, while all the while, you're controlling the outcome with finesse. And soon, very soon, all of that careful orchestration would lead to a moment she would never forget. The day had finally arrived. The culmination of 10 years of patience, planning, and quiet manipulation. I had orchestrated everything so carefully that no one, not my sister, not my parents, not anyone in her social circle, had any idea it was coming. And the timing was perfect. It was a gala, one of the most high-profile charity events of the year. My sister had been invited as a guest of honor, basking in what she thought would be a flawless evening of prestige and applause. I, of course, was there too, but under the guise of a professional consultant, someone whose presence she would never suspect carried any personal weight. Everything had been set up meticulously. The vendors she had relied on for her showcase projects were subtly delayed. The announcements she had been planning were quietly rerouted. Allies she had trusted had been gently persuaded to step aside or contradict her in public, all without drawing suspicion. Every detail fed into a crescendo of embarrassment and exposure, all orchestrated invisibly, and then the moment arrived. She stepped onto the stage, radiant and confident, ready to deliver a speech about her success, her influence, and her achievements. The audience applauded, but the applause quickly faltered as technical glitches, miscommunications, and missteps began to unravel her plans. Slide presentations froze, microphones cut out. People she had expected to support her hesitated, whispered among themselves, and contradicted her statements. The crowd sensed the tension, and my sister, for the first time in her life, realized she was losing control. I stayed in the back, observing every flicker of panic in her eyes, every forced smile, every futile attempt to regain composure. And as she struggled, flustered and humiliated, a part of me almost felt pity. But then I remembered that smirk she had worn that day at my wedding, the one that said she was above reproach, untouchable, untamed. That smirk had cost me a decade of patience and planning, and it would cost her this night. By the end of the evening, she had faced public embarrassment so precisely tailored that even her closest supporters whispered behind her back. The whispers grew louder as she exited the stage, shoulders slumped, pride shattered. It wasn't malicious, it was poetic, and it was mine to direct. Later, when she finally confronted me privately, her voice trembling, a mix of fear and disbelief, I remained calm. "I don't know what you did," she whispered. "Everything. Everything went wrong. I don't understand." I smiled softly. "Sometimes," I said, my tone measured and almost maternal, "things unravel on their own. Arrogance and carelessness have a way of catching up with you." Her eyes widened, searching for any hint that I was involved, but there was nothing. Just the calm, collected sister she had underestimated for a decade. And that was the most satisfying part of all. She had no idea who had orchestrated the entire evening. As I walked away, I felt a quiet satisfaction that no one could take away. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice delivered with patience, precision, and strategy. 10 years of humiliation, 10 years of careful observation, And 10 years of planning had culminated in this moment, and the world around her had witnessed it. The morning after the gala, the repercussions rippled through the family like a silent earthquake. My sister's public humiliation wasn't just a personal embarrassment, it was impossible for the family to ignore. And for the first time in years, my parents' carefully maintained image of perfection started to crack. I watched from a distance as they processed it all. My mother, usually quick to defend my sister's every misstep, could only mutter under her breath. My father, who had once laughed at my wedding day humiliation, finally looked unsettled. Even my relatives whispered in corners, exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. The narrative was shifting, and for the first time, I wasn't the one being underestimated. My sister tried desperately to regain control. She called my parents, demanded explanations, and tried to spin the situation as an unfortunate accident. But no one fully believed her. The careful orchestration of her failures, the subtle nudges, the misaligned opportunities, the tiny betrayals from people she thought she could trust had created a domino effect that she could no longer manage. And here I was, calm, composed, untouchable, watching it all unfold. My presence alone, a quiet smile here, a subtle comment there, reminded everyone that I had changed. I was no longer the gullible, sensitive girl they had laughed at 10 years ago. I was strategic, resilient, and undeniably powerful. The most satisfying moment came during a family lunch a few days later. My sister attempted to assert herself, to re-establish dominance, but every word she spoke was undermined by her previous failures. My parents, for once, weren't siding with her blindly. And as I spoke softly, offering measured advice or insight, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the frustration in her jaw. She knew, deep down, that the balance of power had shifted. This was more than revenge. This was a transformation. I had shifted the family dynamic without ever raising my voice, without ever exposing the meticulous planning that had gone into it. I had become the force my sister had always underestimated, the one she never thought could rise above her shadow. Yet, even as satisfaction coursed through me, I knew the story wasn't over. The sister I faced now was more cautious, more defensive, and dangerously aware that someone had orchestrated her failures. She might try to retaliate, to regain what she had lost, and I had to be ready. But I had learned a crucial truth. Control is the ultimate power, and influence is stronger than confrontation. While she scrambled to repair her reputation, I continued to operate in the background, unseen, quietly guiding the world around her. Every misstep she made, every opportunity she squandered, only cemented the fact that she could no longer dominate the narrative. Family gatherings, social events, even casual conversations became mine to navigate with precision. I spoke carefully, smiled subtly, and let her unravel in ways she couldn't attribute to anyone but herself. It was elegant, calculated, and utterly satisfying. And as I watched her fume, I realized something essential. Revenge wasn't just about making her pay. It was about reclaiming myself, asserting my presence, and ensuring that the person who had once humiliated me would never again underestimate me. The next steps would be even more decisive. I had her attention now. I had the family's attention. And soon, I would have the final, undeniable confirmation that the game I had spent a decade perfecting had reached its peak. By now, the dust had begun to settle. The chaos I had orchestrated, the subtle, calculated unraveling of my sister's carefully constructed life, had done its work. She was no longer untouchable, no longer the center of admiration and envy. Her arrogance had been replaced with caution, her confidence with uncertainty. And for the first time, She looked at me with something approaching respect. Or maybe fear. But the most important transformation wasn't hers, it was mine. Revenge had never been just about hurting her. It was about reclaiming my power, my voice, and my dignity. For years, I had been defined by a single humiliation, a betrayal so public and so personal that it had shaped how I moved through the world. And now, I realized I had reshaped that narrative entirely. I walked into the family gatherings differently. I no longer avoided conversations or concealed my achievements. I held my head high, spoke with authority, and let my presence command attention without a single word about past grievances. My parents, who once laughed at me, now watched in quiet amazement. They couldn't deny the transformation I had undergone, the strength, the composure, the undeniable success. My sister tried, of course. She attempted small reconciliations, veiled apologies, and subtle manipulations, but I remained calm. Forgiveness wasn't a weakness. It was a tool. I chose to forgive, but not in a way that returned her the power she had lost. Instead, I let her actions speak for themselves, knowing the world was already watching and judging, and the world had taken note. Friends, colleagues, even casual acquaintances began to see the new me, not the vulnerable girl of the past, but a woman who had risen above betrayal and crafted her destiny with precision. It was empowering, validating, and infinitely satisfying. Yet, despite the triumph, I felt a quiet sadness. The years lost, the emotional scars, the moments of doubt, they were real. But I realized that these experiences had made me stronger, more strategic, and wiser. They had taught me patience, the value of subtlety, and the power of observation. Most importantly, they had taught me that true revenge is not just about causing someone else to falter, it's about becoming unshakable yourself. In the final moments of this chapter, I found myself reflecting on what had truly mattered. My sister had been humbled, yes, but I had been transformed. The girl who had cried over a stolen wedding dress was gone. In her place stood a woman who commanded respect, who understood the power of patience, and who had mastered the art of quiet influence. And while my sister continued to navigate the consequences of her arrogance, I moved forward with confidence, knowing that the past no longer defined me. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my narrative. And that, more than anything else, was the ultimate victory. Years had passed since that gala, but the story wasn't quite over. Life has a way of circling back, of giving people one last moment to reckon with their choices, and for my sister, that moment had finally arrived. One afternoon, she reached out, tentatively, carefully, a message almost hesitant. I'd like to talk. I read it and smiled. Not with malice, not with anger, but with calm clarity. This was the final test, not of my patience, not of my strategy, but of who I had become. I could confront her, I could scold her, I could even humiliate her in return. But I realized that none of that mattered anymore. I didn't need to prove anything. I had already won. We met in a quiet CAF. She arrived, fidgeting, eyes darting, trying to gauge the new me. The sister she had underestimated for over a decade was no longer the same vulnerable girl. I was poised, confident, and completely in control. I wanted to apologize, she began, almost in a whisper. For everything. The wedding, the humiliation. I was selfish. I was cruel. I listened, letting her words wash over me. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook, it's about freeing yourself from the weight of the past. I accept your apology, I said softly. But that doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. We've both changed. We can't erase the past, but we can choose how it shapes our future. Her shoulders slumped, relief mixed with regret. And for the first time, I saw genuine humility in her eyes, not the false humility of appearances, but the real, hard and kind that comes from seeing your mistakes reflected in someone else's resilience. I left that CAF feeling lighter than I had in years. Revenge, as satisfying as it had been, was no longer the point. The point was me, my growth, my strength, my ability to rise above betrayal and claim my life. And as I walked away, I knew that the past had finally become just that, past. My sister had learned her lesson. My family had seen the power of patience and strategy, and I had reclaimed not just my dignity, but my peace. Sometimes, people think revenge is about payback. But the truth is, the greatest revenge is becoming unshakable, thriving despite those who sought to hurt you, and proving that your worth was never determined by anyone but yourself. And that, my dear viewers, is the story of how I turned betrayal into triumph and how a stolen wedding dress led me to discover my true power. Thanks for watching. Hoped you liked it. If you watched till the end, please comment revenge so that we could understand you were with us till the end. As well as, please let us know, where are you watching from? What do you want to hear from us in next video? If you have any incident in your life, please let us know. We would love to share your story.